told you that the reason you feel totally exhausted at 3 o'clock in the afternoon has, like, absolutely nothing to do with your workload.
Right, which sounds crazy, I know.
Yeah, and instead it has everything to do with how many blue shirts are hanging in your closet.
I mean, it sounds totally absurd on the surface,
Yeah.
honestly.
Yeah.
But the neurological thread connecting those two things is, well, it's much thicker than most of us realize.
Yeah.
We tend to view our days as this series of isolated events,
Yeah.
but they're actually tightly wound, cascading behavioral feedback loops.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, our mission is unpacking this really fascinating transcript of a conversation between two people, Emily and Paul, who have wildly different daily schedules.
Radically different.
But we aren't just going to walk through a basic comparison of their calendars. Like, we're using their specific habits from the exact sound of their alarm clocks to how they talk to their pets to explore the deep mechanics of human behavior.
Exactly. Because we're really looking at how you construct your momentum, how you manage your cognitive load and either regulate or completely dysregulate your nervous system before you've even, left the house.
Okay, let's unpack this because talking about everyday routines might sound like a boring topic, but it actually reveals these deeply ingrained personality types.
It really does. And reviewing the granular details of someone else's daily structure is, it's honestly one of the most effective ways to audit your own.
For sure.
Emily and Paul represent two extreme ends of a spectrum here.
Yeah.
We have proactive control on one side and reactive survival on the other.
Right.
And by breaking down the biology and the psychology driving their choices, specifically their morning and evening differences, we can see how a day's momentum is actually built.
So let's start right at the foundation, which is the biological reality of waking up. Because, I mean, every routine starts there, right?
Exactly. It sets the psychological tone for the entire day.
So Emily is a classic early riser. She's up before the sun. The house is totally quiet, like no cars, no noise. And her alarm is this very soft ambient music.
Which is ideal, yeah.
But Paul is emphatically not a morning person. His alarm is this harsh, loud beep, 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 and he hits the snooze button multiple times.
Of course he does.
Yeah, he tells himself 5 minutes, then 5 more minutes, and he only physically jumps out of bed when he's already in a panic about being late.
See, we need to look at the mechanisms of sleep inertia here, because when Emily uses soft music, she's actually allowing her brain to gradually transition out of its sleep cycles.
It's a gentle wake up.
Exactly. But Paul's approach with the snooze button is uniquely destructive to his biology.
Wait, really? Just from hitting snooze?
Oh yeah, when you hit snooze and drift back off, your brain often tries to start a brand new sleep cycle, which plunges you back into deeper sleep stages.
Oh, no.
And then, 5 minutes later, that loud alarm just violently yanks you back out. So he is intentionally fragmenting his REM sleep.
So he's ruining the sleep he's getting.
Right. And that floods his brain with these sleep-inducing neurochemicals that can literally take hours to clear out of his system.
He's basically inducing his own brain fog.
Yep.
And you see the consequences immediately, like in their very first conscious actions. So for coffee, Emily runs to the machine, takes a little hot milk, and she just sits calmly by the window to think. No phone, no screens.
Just regulating herself.
But Paul takes his coffee strong, black, no milk or sugar, and immediately grabs his phone to check the news and work emails, like before his eyes have even adjusted to the light.
It's a disaster.
I mean, it's like starting a race with a flat tire. He's instantly on the defensive. But I have to ask, pushing back a bit, is Emily's ultra zen, phone-free morning actually realistic for the modern worker, or is that just a luxury?
Well, what's fascinating here is the contrast between those two states.
Yeah.
Emily is proactively controlling her environment, while Paul is letting a loud alarm and immediate emails dictate his stress.
But he's reactive.
Exactly. We all experience what's called a cortisol awakening response, or CRR, in the first 30 to 45 minutes after waking.
A natural cortisol spike.
Right, it's a spike in our alertness hormones designed to get us moving. Emily's quiet window time lets that spike happen naturally, which keeps her nervous system regulated.
And then Paul.
By opening his phone instantly, Paul hijacks that natural response. He introduces external demands before he's even fully awake. He's flooding his prefrontal cortex with, manufactured emergencies and the stress of the outside world.
He's basically inviting his boss and the global news cycle into his bedroom at 6 in the morning.
Precisely. His brain registers those emails as threats, which shifts him into a mild state of fight or flight before he has even washed his face.
Wow.
Emily decides how her day begins. Paul reacts to whatever the world throws at him, which severely compromises his resilience for the rest of the day.
Which perfectly explains how they handle the next major hurdle, right? Which is decision fatigue. Because how we wake up impacts our capacity to make choices before leaving the house.
Absolutely, especially regarding food and clothing.
Right, so let's look at breakfast and the wardrobe divide. Emily has all this time, so she eats yogurt with fruit or makes eggs. Paul, always late, just grabs toast with butter or a banana on his way out.
It's pure survival mode for him.
Exactly. But here's where it gets really interesting. Despite her incredibly organized morning, Emily faces severe decision fatigue.
Oh, this is the structural flaw in Emily's morning.
Yes, she has a ton of clothes, shirts, pants, dresses, but she looks in her closet and gets totally stuck. She literally thinks, I have nothing to wear. And getting dressed becomes this huge struggle.
Right.
But Paul, the guy who just violently interrupted his REM sleep, has completely eliminated decision fatigue.
He really did.
He only owns blue, white, and gray shirts. He just grabs one and is done. In the transcript, he says, thinking is for later. I mean, it's like a superhero uniform or like a tech CEO's wardrobe.
It's hilarious, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a phenomenal example of accidental automation. Paul stumbled into a high-level productivity hack just to survive.
The chaotic morning guy has the most brilliant clothing system.
Yeah, because decision fatigue is a very real psychological phenomenon. Every single choice we make, from what we eat to what we wear, requires executive function.
And that's limited.
Exactly. It relies on a finite pool of metabolic resources in the brain. So while Emily manages her time really well, she is completely depleting her cognitive reserves trying to pick an outfit.
She's spending all her brain dollars on pants.
That's a great way to put it. She's burning through her daily allowance of decision-making power.
Right.
Meanwhile, Paul is so scattered that he instinctively recognized this bottleneck and just removed it. By automating his wardrobe, he preserves his depleted executive function for the actual workday. It just goes to prove that neither routine is perfect.
So they finally make it out the door, and the energy they built or lost carries directly into the commute and the midday hustle.
Right, they take all of that with them.
So Emily drives. She hates the slow stop-and-go traffic, so she copes by listening to really loud music. Paul takes the crowded bus, and he just puts on headphones with music or podcasts to tune everyone out.
Both are basically using sensory gating to survive the commute.
Yeah, and then they hit the workday. They're both super busy with emails, meetings, talking to people. Paul, unsurprisingly, drinks even more coffee.
Using caffeine as a blunt instrument to override his lack of sleep.
Exactly. But lunch is where Emily's morning prep really pays off. She brings a homemade salad or a sandwich that she made in her free time. It's cheap, easy, and requires zero thought midday.
Very efficient.
Paul obviously doesn't prep anything, so he buys a sandwich at a small cafe near the office, but he specifically mentions that he actually really enjoys the 10-minute walk to get there just to get out of the building.
Which is a crucial detail.
Right. And it becomes super important when the clock hits 3 o'clock, the dreaded 3 p.m. slump. Both of them get really sleepy. Emily eats a healthy apple. Paul drinks green tea and eats a cookie. And I have to ask you, the listener, which midday slump person are you? Are you the apple or the cookie? I know I lean towards the cookie.
Oh, definitely the cookie for most people.
Right. But if we look at this, Emily's early morning prep seems to save her time and money, but is she actually winning the midday battle here?
Well, we connect this to the bigger picture. That 3 p.m. slump is a universal human experience. It's tied to a natural dip in our core body temperature, signaling to the brain that it's time to rest.
So it happens to everyone, early bird or night owl.
Exactly. But here is the trap of hyper-efficiency. Emily has the healthier lunch. But if she's eating that homemade salad at her desk while reviewing emails, she isn't getting a mental reset.
And she's just powering through.
Right. Whereas Paul's total lack of organization forces him to leave the building. That 10-minute walk is actually a great habit for his brain.
Really? Just a short walk does that much?
Yes. Neurologically, getting outside provides what we call optic flow, the visual sensation of objects moving past you as you walk. And that has been shown to quiet the amygdala and reduce stress.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Plus, he's getting natural sunlight, which helps offset his terrible morning routine, so he accidentally stumbles into a healthier cognitive recovery strategy than Emily does.
That's wild. Okay, so eventually the workday ends and we get into the evening wind down. And
Mm.
how they transition back into their home lives completely dictates their ability to recharge.
Right? It's the transition from the external world back to the internal sanctuary.
Yeah. So they commute back Emily in bad traffic, but happy to go home. Paul on the bus, super tired, just staring out the window. But then they open their front doors and the pet greetings set the tone immediately.
This is one of my favorite parts of their routines.
It's so funny. Emily's greeted by her energetic dog, Max, who is jumping and barking. Total pure joy. But Paul says hello to his cat, Bella, who just says meow. And Paul literally interprets this as, give me food, I am the boss.
It's hilarious, but it really establishes an immediate emotional baseline
How so?
because environmental cues, like a pet greeting you, serve as anchoring mechanisms for our nervous system. Max's enthusiasm gives Emily an immediate dopamine hit, reinforcing that work is over.
And Bella the cat.
Bella's demand for food, even though Paul obviously loves her presence as just another task, it's another demand on his already depleted executive function.
Which totally explains their dinner prep.
Yes, exactly.
So they both immediately change into comfy t-shirts because, of course. But then Emily finds cutting vegetables, listening to music, and making super pasta to be super relaxing.
Right.
Paul, on the other hand, finds cooking extremely stressful. He's actually a terrible cook. He admits he once managed to burn water by leaving a boiling pot on the stove until it went dry.
Which is terrifying,
Okay.
but it makes perfect sense biologically.
Burning water makes sense.
Well, we're looking at active versus passive decompression here. The goal in the evening is to shift from the sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight state, into the parasympathetic nervous system, which is rest and digest.
Okay, so how does cooking fit into that?
For Emily, cooking is a highly effective active decompression tool. The tactile feedback of chopping vegetables, the focused, low-stakes steps of a recipe, it grounds her in physical reality and pulls her mind away from work stress.
But for Paul, it's just a stressor.
Right. When you are operating on a severe deficit of cognitive bandwidth, like Paul is, a complex task like cooking feels overwhelming. He lacks the working memory at that point in the day to even track a boiling pot.
So he orders pepperoni pizza or makes basic eggs.
Exactly. It's not just laziness, it's a biological preservation tactic. He needs passive decompression.
Which he gets after dinner. He cleans the kitchen, sits on his big red sofa with Bella sleeping on him, and watches funny comedies just to laugh.
And Emily.
Emily takes Max for a quiet night walk under the stars and then reads a book.
See, they both successfully found their unique decompression triggers. Emily uses nature, walking, and reading. Paul uses humor and the physical affection as his cat. Laughter is actually a highly effective way to actively flush cortisol from the system.
Okay, but these evening relaxation choices eventually push us into the most critical part of the cycle, right? The sleep cycle loop.
This is where everything catches up to them.
Because it throws us right back to the beginning. Emily goes to bed early at 10 p.m. She brushes her teeth, puts on pajamas, reads in bed for exactly 10 minutes, and just snaps her fingers she's asleep instantly.
Her circadian rhythm is incredibly well entrained.
But Paul goes to bed late, usually around 11:30 p.m. or midnight. He falls into that classic trap of watching just one more movie or scrolling the internet.
Yeah, we've all been there.
And the transcript explicitly states the consequence. Paul is tired the next morning, which creates this big circle or loop. So what does this all mean? It means Paul isn't inherently a bad morning person, right? He's just a victim of his own late-night internet scrolling.
Exactly. What Paul is experiencing is a textbook case of revenge bedtime procrastination.
Oh, I have heard of that. Unpack that for us.
Revenge bedtime procrastination happens when individuals who feel they have little control over their daytime hours refuse to go to sleep early.
Because they want their time back.
Right. They want to regain a sense of freedom and autonomy late at night. Think about Paul's day. The jarring alarm, the immediate emails, the crowded bus, even the demanding cat. He feels like a passenger in his own life.
So staying up late is his rebellion.
Exactly. When midnight rolls around and the world stops demanding things from him, he refuses to close his eyes. It's his psychological rebellion. But this raises an important question for anyone listening. Is your morning grogginess actually just an evening discipline problem?
Oh, that's a tough pill to swallow.
It is, because physiology doesn't recognize midnight as a reset button. Paul's inability to turn off the internet at 11 p.m. is the direct biological cause of his frantic snooze button morning.
The fragmented REM sleep, the reliance on caffeine, burning the water, all of it is downstream from that single late-night choice.
While Emily's strict 10 p.m. routine her discipline to close the book and turn off the light that is the secret engine powering her perfect pre-dawn coffee moments.
So our days really are just these giant interconnected loops.
They absolutely are.
Emily's early morning buys her the peace to prep lunch and enjoy the quiet, even though it ends up causing her outfit stress.
Right.
And Paul's late-night movie habits guarantee his mornings are a frantic sprint, which forced him to brilliantly hack his wardrobe just to survive it.
Exactly. So I'd really encourage you to look at your own daily routines today. Do you have a Bella the cat demanding dinner when you're already exhausted? Or do you have a closet full of clothes but nothing to wear?
It's all connected, but I want to leave you with one final kind of provocative thought that wasn't even explicitly in the transcript.
Oh, let's hear it.
If you were forced to completely swap your daily routine with someone who has the exact opposite schedule, like a night owl becoming an early bird or vice versa, how long do you think it would take for your actual personality to change?
Wow, that's a great question.
Right. Like, are we just the product of the hours we keep? If Paul woke up at 5 a.m. to soft music for a year, would he still be the same chaotic comedy-watching Paul?
It really challenges the idea of fixed personality traits versus just behavioral adaptations.
It really does. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Take a hard look at your own feedback loops this week, and we'll catch you next time.